I spent a week in a coma, hanging by a thread between life and death. When I finally opened my eyes, I wasn't welcomed by my husband's embrace, but by a crumpled piece of paper on the side table. Pay the hospital bill yourself. You're nothing but dead weight. I cried for hours, feeling like my world was crumbling after being abandoned by the man I had given everything to, until a mysterious man in an impeccable suit walked into my room and said, "Dry your tears. Your husband just threw away a diamond to bend down and pick up a rock from the pavement." Before the story begins, type in the comments which city you're listening from, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so this channel can keep growing and bringing you even more intense stories. The strong smell of antiseptic was the first thing that woke Vesper's senses. When she started to regain consciousness, her eyelids felt heavy, as if someone had placed tons of lead on them. Her whole body ached, stiff, joints numb, after a sleep that had lasted too long. With effort, she forced herself to open her eyes. The white fluorescent light on the ceiling blinded her, forcing her to blink several times until she adjusted. The monotonous hum of the air conditioner filled the dense silence of the room. Vesper moved her fingers a little to make sure she was still alive and that she still had control over her own body. Her memories were blurry, just flashes of a terrible pain in her head. And then, darkness. She slowly turned her face to the right, expecting to find Drayton, her husband, asleep in the chair, maybe holding her hand, watching over her. For 5 years of marriage, Vesper had strived to be a devoted and attentive wife. She imagined Drayton desperate, worried, praying for her recovery. But that hope shattered in a second when her gaze swept the room. It was empty. The visitor's chair, perfectly placed in a corner, looked like it hadn't been used in a long time. There were no flowers, no fruit baskets, no get-well-soon cards, and most painfully, no sign of Drayton. Vesper's heart shrank. Fear began to rise in her chest. How long had she been unconscious? Why wasn't her husband there when she woke up? Her throat burned with thirst. She wanted to call a nurse, but her voice got stuck. Then she saw the paper on the nightstand next to a glass of water, covered by a thin layer of dust. It was a sheet torn hurriedly from a notebook, folded in two, without an envelope. With a trembling hand, weak and scared, she stretched her fingers until she reached it. Something inside her screamed that there was something very wrong with that message. Her heart pounded in her chest with painful force. She unfolded the sheet slowly. She immediately recognized Drayton's rushed, jagged handwriting. She read the first sentence, and the air got stuck in her lungs. The message was brutal, no chaser. She had to pay all the hospital expenses herself when she woke up. The next line was even crueler. He wrote that Vesper only served to complicate his life. At the end, a cold and brief goodbye. He was leaving and didn't plan to ever come back to take care of a sickly wife. The paper slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor. For Vesper, the entire world collapsed in that instant. The tears she had tried to hold back flowed uncontrollably down her sunken cheeks. Her sobs broke the frozen silence of the room. The physical pain of waking up from a coma was nothing compared to what was tearing her chest apart. She cried inconsolably, mourning her luck. She remembered every sacrifice she had made, how she accepted living simply, how she saved every single dollar for their future, how she bent over backwards to attend to Drayton, how she gave in time and time again to his massive ego. And the payment for all of that had been abandonment in her moment of greatest vulnerability. Being treated like a nuisance and tossed out like trash. She felt like the most naive woman in the world for having loved a man like him. The tick-tock of the wall clock marked the hours while Vesper sank into endless weeping. Her eyes were swollen, her breathing ragged, and she felt a sensation of absolute emptiness. She had no parents, no siblings left. Now she was husbandless too. She felt completely alone, with no reason to keep living. At the peak of her despair, when she could only stare blankly at the ceiling, she heard the door handle turn. She didn't move. She thought it would be a nurse checking her IV or a doctor irritated about the unpaid bills. But the footsteps that entered were firm, confident, different from the rushed steps of the staff. The figure approached her bed. The scent of expensive, elegant cologne began to displace the smell of medicine. Vesper turned her head slowly and saw a middle-aged black man standing tall next to her bed. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, his hair groomed with care, already speckled with gray, and his face radiated both serenity and authority. He didn't look at her with pity or superiority, but with a mix of respect and sincere concern. Vesper was bewildered. She didn't know him. Was he someone from administration about to demand the hospital payment? She hurried to wipe her tears with the back of her hand, trying to look strong even though inside she felt shattered to pieces. She braced herself to hear how they were kicking her out, but the man just offered a slight, reassuring smile. He bowed his body slightly with an old-school courtesy and spoke in a deep but soft voice. He introduced himself as Mr. Sterling. Vesper remained silent, waiting for his explanation. He cast a fleeting glance at the paper lying on the floor, Drayton's letter, and then looked back into her eyes. "Don't shed one more tear for that trash," he said calmly. "Your husband just threw away a diamond to go pick up rocks from the street." The phrase hit her like a slap, but at the same time, it sounded strangely true. Mr. Sterling took a step closer, and with a tone loaded with intention added, "Drayton just made the biggest mistake of his life, because he has no idea who you really are." Those words made Vesper's skin crawl. It was as if this man knew a secret about her own life. She looked at him with a furrowed brow, unable to reconcile her reality as an apparently poor and lonely woman with such a metaphor about diamonds. For years, she had seen herself as an orphan struggling to survive in the city before meeting Drayton 5 years ago. She never had clear memories of her childhood, just blurry fragments she could never fit together. She had always attributed that void to trauma from an accident Drayton had told her about. With a hoarse voice, Vesper asked Mr. Sterling to explain what those words about diamonds and rocks meant. He pulled a chair from the corner of the room, placed it next to the bed, and sat down without losing his upright and respectful posture. He began to speak carefully but clearly. He told her that 5 years ago she had suffered a very serious accident that caused partial amnesia. In the middle of the chaos, she got separated from her true family. Drayton, who was either passing by chance or perhaps had it all planned, appeared as a savior hero. Since Vesper didn't remember who she was or where she came from, she clung to him as her only lifeline. Drayton took advantage of that dependence to convince her she had no one else in the world, making her feel indebted to him as if she owed him her life. Vesper listened with her mouth slightly open, feeling the pieces of a long, incomplete puzzle starting to fit. She remembered how many times Drayton had repeated that thanks to him she was alive, that without him she would be nobody. Those phrases had kept her obedient and submissive, as if every whim of her husband was a fair price for having saved her. Mr. Sterling then pulled a digital tablet out of his briefcase. When he turned on the screen, several photographs of Vesper's past appeared. She saw herself, but different. Designer clothes, a radiant smile, standing next to an older man with an imposing presence. Mr. Sterling explained that man was her biological father, Langston Vance, a mogul who owned a conglomerate of companies operating in various sectors. Vesper felt her heart skip a beat when she heard that her father had died 2 years ago, sick, without ever stopping the search for his missing daughter. Mr. Sterling was Mr. Vance's right-hand man, entrusted with continuing the search outside the reach of the police and the news. After a long and exhausting road, he had finally found her lying in a hospital bed, abandoned by her own husband. The truth hit her hard. She wasn't a woman with no origin or resources, as she had always believed. She was the sole heiress to a fortune she could never have imagined. And yet, the pain of Drayton's betrayal didn't dissipate. Knowing who she really was made everything he had done seem even crueler. Mr. Sterling slid his finger across the screen and showed another type of document, bank statements. He explained that during the week Vesper was in a coma, he had investigated Drayton. The account movements revealed that he had secretly drained all their shared savings, the money Vesper had gathered dollar by dollar with so much effort. Instead of using it for her treatments or their future, he had transferred it to the account of a woman named Kaylin. That name felt painfully familiar. Kaylin was her best friend, the woman she used to eat with at home, the confidant for all her relationship problems. Vesper's body began to tremble with contained rage. Not only had she been abandoned, but she had also been betrayed by the two people she trusted most. Mr. Sterling looked at her with compassion, but firmness. He assured her she didn't need to worry about the hospital bill or where to live afterward. All her family's properties and resources were ready to return to the hands of their true owner. From that moment on, his mission would be to protect her and restore her rights and dignity. Just then, Vesper's old phone with the cracked screen vibrated on the table. Drayton's name appeared on the display. Vesper's heart started beating hard again, but this time not out of love or nostalgia, but from a mix of hate and repulsion. She looked at Mr. Sterling, asking for strength. He nodded, inviting her to answer. With a trembling hand, Vesper slid her finger over the green button and brought the phone to her ear. He didn't give her time to say a single word. Drayton's harsh voice exploded on the other end of the line. Without greetings or worries, he announced that the next day he would come to the hospital, not to see her or apologize, but accompanied by a lawyer. He wanted to speed up the divorce and made it clear with an arrogant tone. He warned her not to dream of getting a single dollar from the marital assets because, according to him, she had never contributed anything to the household economy. She was just a constant expense. Every insult was like a whip. Tears welled up again, but now they burned with rage. Vesper remained silent, listening to every word, letting Drayton empty all his poison. Beside her, Mr. Sterling clenched his fists, indignant at what he was hearing. When Drayton hung up without saying goodbye, Vesper slowly lowered the phone and fixed her gaze on the white wall. The expression in her eyes began to change. The look that was previously full of sadness and despair sharpened, cold and determined. Something new woke up in her. She was no longer the weak Vesper, blind with love. She was a betrayed wife with immense power behind her that her enemies were still unaware of. She turned to Mr. Sterling and nodded firmly. She was ready to accept her true destiny and answer for every tear she had shed. The next morning, the sun's rays filtered shyly through the curtains of the hospital room, but their warmth wasn't enough to melt the ice in the atmosphere. Vesper had gotten up before dawn, washed her face, carefully wrapped her head in a simple, neat silk scarf, and sat on the bed as upright as possible. Mr. Sterling was hiding behind the thick divider curtain, just as they had planned the night before. No one who entered should see him. His mission was to record everything that happened as irrefutable proof for the future. Vesper took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind in her chest. She had to play a role, to go back to being the submissive and foolish Vesper her husband thought he knew. It didn't take long before heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door burst open without a single knock of courtesy. Drayton walked in with a furrowed brow, that sour expression Vesper knew too well. But what made her blood boil wasn't him, but the woman clinging to his arm like a vine. Kaylin walked in, exaggerating every movement, hanging with familiarity onto Drayton. She was wearing flashy clothes, a brand-name purse hanging from her shoulder, an accessory Vesper knew too well she couldn't buy on a simple employee's salary unless someone had gifted it to her. Vesper lowered her gaze, hiding the flash of hate burning in her eyes and adopting a sad, pleading expression. Drayton didn't waste time asking about her health or how she felt after being on the brink of death. He walked straight to the bed, looked her up and down with a gaze of contempt, and snorted as if her presence was just one more nuisance in his schedule. He roughly threw a red folder onto Vesper's lap. The impact startled her. She didn't need to open it to know what it contained. They were the divorce papers he had promised over the phone. Drayton crossed his arms over his chest and planted himself in front of her like a cruel judge facing a defenseless defendant. He started speaking in a high, strident voice, proclaiming he was sick of taking care of a perpetually sick woman. He said Vesper was nothing more than an economic burden, slowing down his rising career. He claimed he needed a partner on his level, someone who could shine with him in front of his partners, not a basic woman who only knew how to give him problems. Every word was a knife sticking into Vesper's heart, but she swallowed them one by one without responding. Beside him, Kaylin smiled smugly. That friend who had so many times asked to borrow money was now looking at her with the arrogance of someone who thinks they've won the game. She even allowed herself to comment in a mocking tone that Vesper should have the dignity to let Drayton go so he could be happy with a more suitable woman. Vesper slowly raised her head and looked at both of them with eyes full of calculated tears. She let them slide down her cheeks, not out of sadness, but to perfect her performance. With a raspy, weak voice, she asked, "Is there really no second chance for our marriage?" The answer was a cruel laugh from Drayton. He laughed out loud as if he had heard an absurd joke. He pointed his finger at her and said there was no point in keeping trash inside the house. He stated his decision was made, and nothing and no one would change it. He urged her to sign the documents once and for all because he had much more important things to do than put up with his wife's drama. With a trembling hand, partly from contained rage and partly on purpose, Vesper opened the red folder. Her eyes scanned the clauses, all blatantly unfair. In them, she renounced any right to common assets and committed not to claim any type of alimony after the divorce. Drayton wanted to leave her on the street without a cent. She took the pen he held out to her. She held her breath for a few seconds. Inside, she promised herself that this signature wouldn't be the seal of her defeat, but the beginning of a war. She put the tip on the paper and traced her name slowly, letter by letter, over the fiscal stamp. As soon as she finished, Drayton snatched the folder from her hands as if he feared she would regret it. His face lit up with relief and satisfaction. He checked the document briefly and smiled widely at Kaylin. They looked like a couple who had just won the lottery. Drayton even allowed himself to kiss Kaylin's cheek right in front of Vesper, a scene so repulsive it almost made her stomach turn. Then he looked at her one last time and declared that from that day on they were two strangers. He warned her not to call him again, and definitely not to show up at his job or his new house asking for money. He said he couldn't stand to see her face ever again. Vesper lowered her head, keeping silent, but when Drayton and Kaylin turned their backs and walked toward the door, she looked up. Her gaze no longer had a trace of sadness. It had turned cold and cutting. The moment Drayton rested his hand on the handle, she spoke in a low but clear voice, very different from the weak tone before. "Remember this second well, Drayton. You are the one kicking me out. You are the one throwing me in the trash. Don't you ever dare kneel to ask me to come back." Drayton stopped for a rigid instant. He turned his head slightly, looking at her with a furrowed brow, surprised by that change of tone. However, his arrogance wiped away any suspicion. He huffed with contempt, took Kaylin's hand, and left the room, slamming the door so hard it rumbled like the end of a painful scene in Vesper's life. When the echo faded, the curtain in the corner opened. Mr. Sterling stepped out with a serene face, though his eyes burned with anger. In his hand, he still held a small camera, turned on, which had recorded every last gesture of the traitorous couple. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked. Vesper wiped her hand across her cheeks to erase the last fake tears. She straightened her back, took a deep breath, and looked at him with confidence. "I'm better than ever," she said. "The trash took itself out. Get everything ready for my discharge. I'm looking forward to starting my game." Thanks to Mr. Sterling's arrangements, the hospital discharge paperwork was resolved quickly and without issues. There were no arguments over overdue bills or looks of contempt from the staff. Everything was settled. Vesper walked out the main door, but this time she didn't head to a bus stop or wait for a ride share like she would have done before. Instead, she walked toward a shiny black sedan parked in the VIP zone. A uniformed chauffeur stepped out briskly, opened the back door, and bowed with respect. It still felt strange to Vesper to receive this treatment, but she forced herself to get used to it. She climbed into the vehicle, breathing in the scent of leather and air conditioning, leaving behind the oppressive smell of the hospital. During the ride, she looked out the window. The bustling city slid past her eyes, people running, cars trapped in traffic, street vendors. And she remembered the times she had walked those same streets, exhausting herself to earn a few dollars to support